You are a Zen teacher and a lifelong environmentalist. How, just in the broadest sense, how do you see the climate crisis?
First, I see it as something we brought on ourselves.
Mm.
Um, and I see that as a result of a, a range of splits, a range of divides, a range of points of separation that dislodge or obstruct our ability to recognize ourselves as part of nature, as expressions of nature. So even that we call it, nature or the environment as if we're not part of it is odd and part of our separation. Um, and I think that our inability to address a lot of these divisions and splits within ourselves and in society and with each other uh, renders us like increasingly consumptive. It's like we're trying to fill this like emptiness. We're trying to fill that sense of disconnect, and so we just keep consuming. We've objectified land and we've objectified the planet into land, something that can be traded and bought and owned and sold, and that kind of rupture is, has to have some reaction someplace else, and our consumption is that reaction, is the reaction to like, how do I make sense of this? Like, something is out of balance here. Maybe I don't even know how to name it, but I consume in order to distract myself from the awful or uncomfortable or awkward feelings that I have, and that we have out of that. The climate crisis, I think, that especially expresses itself in the form of capitalist system of, bigger is better, more, and much more until we drop. This kind of like endless need to continue to feed and to fill, for the purposes not of like people being satisfied, but for the purposes of people having more and more wealth and power. It's a real imbalance.
Almost for the purposes of numbing the pain.
Numbing the pain. I think numbing the pain, and I think addressing like core questions that we have about ourselves as humanity that don't get addressed in the way that we've structured society. So we don't have rites of passage that help us understand our rightful place. We don't have real answers to why some people are considered better than other people. We don't have real answers to, why men have to be aggressive, taught to be aggressive and violent and misogynist in some places, and honored their mother and their daughters in other places. It's like we've created real confusion for people, and when we, it seems like as human beings, when we have that kind of confusion and we don't have a way to actually work it off of our bodies, especially as we get more heady, that what we do is we do these destructive things. We self-destruct. I think we're the like only creatures that do this in the animal kingdom, that we do self-destructive behavior.
Matthew Fox says we're the only species in 4.5 billion years of evolution that could choose not to go extinct, but we haven't made that choice yet.
That makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the intersection between the work you do on race, equity, and liberation with the climate crisis?
I think in the West, particularly in the U.S., particularly in North America, I think that that race is intimately linked with the climate crisis. I think that the sense of division and separation and the kind of unanswered questions we have around our relationship as peoples expresses itself as a disconnected relationship to the land, to the planet, and to so-called resources. Even the notion that people and land are resources is obstructed and weird and strange. And so I think that race has this social construct of false divide, right, of false hierarchy, creates a lot of confusion for us. It creates a lot of confusion for those of us that are impacted by it materially, impacted by it socially in overt ways. But I think it creates, I want to say, almost even more confusion from the people that are privileged by it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that disruption, that inability to make sense of where do I put this the ways that I've been taught to like look down on other people and uh, separate other people, think I'm better than those other people, while the world catches up with this myth and shows things like it's actually not true that these people are inferior. It's actually not true that those other people don't have skills or they're barbarians or they're, fill in the blank. And so you have this real rift in the story of that's told in the myth of white supremacy that people don't know what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the kind of like race for more is fueled by that sense of emptiness and despair. Underneath it all is that I think human beings yearn to be connected, and they're curious about each other, and they want to have a sense of care about each other, and we want to have compassion for ourselves and for other people. And it's terribly obstructed by this power mythology, power over, sense of dominance. And that sense of dominance over people, because we don't know how to treat people and treat ourselves in relationship to each other. How could we possibly understand how to treat the earth, how to treat the planet? So I think they're intimately connected. And for me, what sits at the core of the work is really liberation from this feeling of separation from others. So I didn't choose to do work around race. I chose to do work around liberation that creates a sense of separation, right? So the liberation is to bring us out of that separation. That separation is from Earth, from the planet. That separation is from, quote unquote, environment and nature. Socially, that separation expresses itself in race, in so-called race, the social construct of race. I think it's very, very difficult. Most of the people in the world turns out they're of color, right? So they're indigenous and they're black and they're people of color. They're mixed race peoples. And so we really need the togetherness of all peoples in order to come up with solutions that have been created by systems that are bound by a theology, if you will, of oppression and of using people and land as resources. And so if the people that are most populating the planet don't have access to the levers of power to make decisions, then we are really going to be in a real problem. And so for me to navigate race is to actually get to the genius and the solutions and the potential of all of the people together to be able to face what collectively is impacting us. But we can't even pay attention to the climate in a good way because we're busy like picking over like who's better and who's not better and who got those jobs and who's creating what crisis and who's at fault for this thing and that thing. So there's a if ever the human family needed to come together and be in relationship with each other, this is the time to do that.
So you're saying racial injustice, climate change, two symptoms of the same root problem of disconnection.
Yeah,
Planet.
we talk about it socially, but it's a spiritual crisis, right?
Spiritual.
So we have a fundamental spiritual crisis that we take it and we go, oh, this is a social crisis, right? That's race. This is an environmental crisis. That's the planet. It's the same thing. It's a spiritual identity crisis, a location crisis. Who are we in relationship to everything else that is? What is our rightful role? How do we play our rightful role and drop into a place in which we're in right relationship with all of the other people and beings on the planet? When we don't have a way to even apprehend that as a question, to know that that is our question, then calamity ensues, and that's what we see.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular Buddhist teaching or perspective that you find particularly relevant to the struggle that we have around connection or around the climate crisis?
Yeah, it's a funny thing because there's lots of teachings we have in Buddhism in there pushed around, especially in Western Buddhism. And according to the text, this man that's been called the Buddha from 2,600 years ago seems that, at least based on the text, that one of the things that he repeated most often is that I am because you are. When I rise, you rise. When I fall away, you fall away. That's talking about interconnection. It's talking about mutual interdependence, that we co-arise, that my condition and conditioning is dependent and relational to your condition and conditioning. So if there was ever a thing that really turned us towards like, oh, that's what's happening here. We can't separate from each other. We can do it in a sort of individual time space way that seems like we're not really in relationship with everything else that is. But I think that what we have now in the climate crisis, in the crises around race and social oppressions, is the realization that, oh, that's actually true. We are connected, and we're seeing it, and we're seeing it in such huge ways. We're seeing the ripple effect of demagoguery rippling across the planet. We're seeing the impacts of sort of so-called populism, right? That is turning away from the idea of being open-hearted and generous to peoples as they face strife in their own lands and their own political realities. Turn into like me and mine, and this belongs to me, and we're going to protect this and keep those people out. And it's a similar thing in terms of how we use our relationship to the planet. It's like this land is mine, this place is mine, and that place I want it to be mine, and so I'm going to go over there and take it. And many of us did not come out of most in recent times roles that are in relationship with stewardship with land and stewardship with where what the earth actually is. And so we have forgotten in the West what stewardship is, for the most part, right, in our society, not completely. Indigenous peoples, by design, by staying connected to their homes and their spaces and their relationship to their own spiritualities, remember. And our role is to figure out how to remember our rightful place. And these separations and these divides help keep us away from. It's sort of like it's keeping us away from the doctor. The doctor has kind of an answer for what to do about the illness, and we're busy fighting over like that's not the doctor I actually want. And we see the impact of that is this broad social illness destroying the very thing that gives us life.
Mm-hmm. And how hopeful are you personally that we will navigate this treacherous time?
Very hopeful.
Why?
Because I see the groundswell of people that recognize that the separation is not working for them anymore, that whatever the benefits and privileges and entitlements that they thought at some point in time, that they were induced or seduced into believing were worth it. They're seeing that the loss of disconnect from their own humanity is not working. Like, not just like, oh, that's terrible what's happening to those other people, but God damn it, like I deserve to have my humanity intact, and that's not working for me anymore. And we see that groundswell in direct proportion, I want to say increasing proportion, to all of the things that the media tends to focus our attention on, the ills, how terrible it is. But for every incident of, let's just say, poor behavior, poor choices by people in positions of leverage power, there are thousands of people that are saying, enough. That's not who I am. It's not who I want to be. It's not how I want to be in relationship with my own soul, my own spirit, my own self. It's not how I want to be in relationship with the planet. That is dampened, right, by the fact of how we draw attention to a particular few people. But I'm very hopeful because the speed at which I see people making the choices and making the connections, right, literally the connections in their own mind, and wanting and yearning for the connections to their own heart and their own body in a way that I have not seen in my lifetime in the same way. And that the willingness to realize and own responsibility for the things that have happened and the willingness to be accountable for the things that are to unfold. It's shifting so dramatically, so rapidly that I'm entirely hopeful. It's a little bit of a race, right?
It
It's
is
like
a race.
which thing will come first, right?
Yeah.
Like who will get most intense enough about the commitment. And I think if we, as they say, gird our loins and pull it together and put our attention more on the hope than on the fear, put our attention on more the way that I say it in the radical Dharma spaces that I hold is that, it's actually already happening. And what we're doing is realizing what is already true. We're realizing the connection that we have with each other. We're realizing the repair. We're realizing, meaning to make real the healing. We're realizing all of those things. And we have a lens that fixates on the past and fixates on how it used to be and fixate on how terrible it could be. But actually, the so called future is already here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that groundswell is just bringing it into witness until enough of us can see it and say, yes, I choose that, not the past. I choose what's possible, not what has been in before. I choose connection rather than fear. I choose discomfort rather than the comfort of entitlements and privileges. I choose the planet over convenience.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening already.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.